Hello, today we will be discussing Mozart and Swiss Mayer's Requiem in D minor, specifically the movement of Lacrimosa. Something interesting to point out right away is that it has two composers, Mozart and Swiss Mayer. And the Requiem in D minor is pretty much well known to be written by Mozart and it's credited to him. But in reality, he only wrote about half of this whole Requiem. And he only wrote about 8 measures of the Lacrimosa. And that's because he ended up passing away. And Swiss Mayer was one of his followers, and he was appointed by Mozart's wife to complete the works of Mozart. Okay, so we're going to start off with looking at the broad overview of the form of Lacrimosa. Now, Lacrimosa isn't necessarily a long piece. It's only 30 measures long, but it is quite interesting, complex, different than what one would be used to seeing. So let's go ahead and have a look at this. So as you can see, I have labeled this piece as a rounded binary form, but there will be others that will disagree and maybe say that it's a ternary form, which I completely understand because, well, one thing is that both can be mixed up. They're very similar. But just based on the different properties of a binary form and how short this piece is, and how what we will discuss later on in this presentation, it will be a rounded binary form. Now, as you can see, it is a short piece, not many themes going on, and then there are a couple of cadences going on, good amount of cadences, modulations, elisions, and we will discuss the first part of the rounded binary form, which will be the A. So as you can see, we're going to be discussing the first section of the binary form, which will be our A section. We're starting off with a 2-measure intro, and then we have a 6-measure sentence. And we typically do see 8-measure sentences, but right here, this is where we start breaking the rules right away. It is composed of a presentation and continuation. Presentation is 2 measures long, but the basic idea is only 1 measure long. And we're used to seeing basic idea of 2 measures, basic idea of 2 measures. Now in the continuation, it is 4 measures long, which is pretty much typical, but we don't have fragments in the first 2 measures. Now, as we will listen later on, these 2 units, as I put there with the U, sound completely different from the basic idea, so it would be wrong to label them as a fragment. But these still make sense with the rest of the sentence. And then those 2 measures are followed by a cadential pattern, a 2-measure cadential pattern, which will lead to a half cadence at the end of measure 8. So we're going to see a bit of the complexity starting in this first A section. Okay, so now we'll be discussing the second section of the binary form, and I have labeled that B and A prime. So from measures 9 through 14, that would be the B section. And then there will also be a diversion section in this in between the B and the A prime. So that would be from measures 15 to 18. I'll explain that a little bit more right now. Then we have a cadential echo from 19 to 20, 2-measure cadential echo, and then I labeled also a retransition, and you'll really hear that as it goes. It sounds like it goes back to the beginning in measure 21. And then we'll finish off with A prime from measures 22 to the end. And I'll explain that later as well. So as we can see, first the B section, measures 9 to 14, we have a hybrid 3, which would be the compound, basic idea, and a continuation. Compound, basic idea, as we can see, it's already different from what we're used to. It's 2 measures long. 1 measure of basic idea, one measure of a contrasting idea. And then we have a continuation, which has been labeled, which is pretty much 4 measures long, but it's kind of different. It's made up of, it's composed of 3 fragments, 3 measures of fragments, and 1 measure of the cadential pattern that we're going to see here later on. So in total, it's going to be 6 measures long, and we're used to seeing it as 8. It's a little bit different right there as well. And the diversion, pretty much the reason why it's a diversion is because we're going to hear how it starts to fall back and starts to go back to the beginning of what we heard, the beginning of the piece, which was the Lacrimosa portion. And this can be labeled as a hybrid number 4. Now this one is different as well, as 4 measures long. Compound basic idea, 2 measures, and we have a basic idea and a compound idea, each 1 measure. And then we have and the consequent 2 measures long. We have the basic idea and a 1 measure of a cadential pattern as well. Something I did forget to mention is between the hybrid 3 and the hybrid 4, we do have a imperfect authentic cadence, which is pretty much not really traditional, but in the score itself, if you want to go ahead and pause the presentation, when you go ahead and analyze that, it is in an imperfect authentic cadence. We do have the tonic in the bass, but the soprano does not have the tonic either, which pretty much is already an indicator that it's not a perfect authentic cadence. Now after the hybrid 4, there is an elision, and at the same time there is a modulation from the 1, which would be D, to the 3, F, and at the same time it's also a perfect authentic cadence. The cadential echo, you can also think of it as a little interlude that will lead back to our A prime section. It's only 2 measures long as well. Then we have a retransition. Retransition because one of the clear indicators of the retransition is that there is another modulation. It modulates back to the key of D minor, and at the same time it's a perfect authentic cadence at that point right there. So in a way, we kind of go from hearing something dark, sinister, something light, calming, to something dark and sinister. So, and it even sounds exactly or almost exactly like the beginning in our introduction. Only this is 1 measure long. Now this will lead us to our A section, which is from measure 22 all the way to the end. A prime section. The reason I say A prime is because, yes, the first 2 measures of our presentation sound exactly the same, and if you compare them side by side, they are the same notes, same chordal patterns, same everything. So they do have everything the same, except the text of the what is being sung is different. That's why I put A prime. And not just that, but those two measures are the only two measures that sound the same, and everything else is pretty much new material. So in order for it to be a binary form, the A prime section can have partial amount of the material from the beginning. It doesn't have to be fully the same. It doesn't have to be exactly identical. But I just wanted to point that out. So we have a 6-measure sentence. Presentation 2 measures long. Basic idea, basic idea. Pretty much what we've seen in the beginning. And then we have a 4-measure continuation. In the continuation, we do not have fragments again. We do have one unit and another unit. These two units do not sound anything like the basic idea. And then we have a 2-measure cadential pattern right there that leads to a perfect authentic cadence, and it's also the point of elision as well. Now, as far as the ending goes, the suffix, which I have labeled there, I can't really specifically give a name, a proper name, proper anything for this suffix. But it is probably cadential, some sort of cadential suffix, just something outside of what we what I actually know so far. But it is a suffix, 3 measures long. And the interesting part here too is that, like many sacred music, mass music, church music, whatever you want to call it, there is a nice plagal at the end, a plagal cadence at the end. We can also call it a Picardy, or what we like to call a Picardy third. We have this whole 29 measures of something in a minor key, and even the first 2 measures of the suffix are it's a 1, 4, minor 1, minor 4, the chords that are given in that section. But then we get something very nice and major in measure 30. So it's plagal, so it is kind of known as the Amen cadence right there. And it's a perfect way to end this whole Lacrimosa, this whole piece, considering that it's all pretty much has a dark tone to it, a sinister tone. It is in a minor key. So we'll go ahead and hear this whole section right here, measures 9 through 30, our B and A prime section of our binary form, of our rounded binary form. Now, as far as themes and motives go, there aren't really many in this whole piece. The piece is pretty short. I can't say it's repetitive, but we do see these sort of rhythms, specifically the rhythms, a lot throughout this piece. So as you can see, what I have highlighted in green right there, that pretty much we see for two measures in the beginning in our A section, and we also see it again in our A prime section. Same rhythms, same notes, same chords that are going on with that. And then we can also see in our introduction, which is labeled in blue, which is highlighted in blue, that pretty much that rhythm goes on throughout the whole piece in our piano or in our string instruments. So it's pretty much like kind of like a waltz kind of thing, boo cha cha, boom cha cha, throughout the whole piece, and that rhythm does not really change until I guess towards the end, when we kind of hold out some of the we sustain the notes at the end, but that's in our like plagal cadence. So we see that a lot throughout the whole piece, or actually throughout the whole piece. We also do see, if you here highlighted in yellow, pretty much that idea or of having quarter notes or even eighth notes right on the beat. And as we can see, we also have like a bit of ascending and descending in throughout our whole piece. Specifically, what I circled right there. There are a lot of instances of chromaticism throughout the whole piece. Chromaticism rising and then falling. So it pretty much helps build the tension in this whole piece. And I have also circled this other section in orange here that is seen specifically in the middle of the piece. Now it does sound like the beginning, but the rhythm has changed, and also the way the direction of where this whole section is going as well is different. I guess you can say it's like a variation of the beginning of the what I circled in green. But I just wanted to point that one out because we do see that a lot, especially in our B section, in our diversion section. So I mean, this is pretty much what I've been able to find. It is a short piece, but there isn't much to like get out of the piece. But that does not make this piece a simple piece. It is complicated, it is complex, it is very interesting, pleasing to the ear, even though it is in a minor key. But all these little motive, theme, idea kind of things going on here go on throughout the whole piece. So, which is why I only pointed out here the first page of the score, because, like I said, these things are kind of repetitive, but with maybe in during the modulation or something else. So now I'm just going to be discussing pretty much an overall thing of what discussion of what I thought about the whole piece, little things I liked about it as well. So I labeled this as like an unorthodox, unclear form, and with different unclear phrase types as well. This was not an easy piece to pretty much dissect. There can be many opinions about what the form is or the phrase types, but I mean, I don't think anyone that has an opinion on this piece would be necessarily wrong, but there is evidence that backs up what I have chosen more than other things as well, and the phrase types that I have chosen as well throughout this piece. So it is unorthodox, unclear, but I was able to point out the different theme types and the overall form of this piece. Also, something I liked a lot was the use of secondary dominant, secondary leading tones. A lot of chromaticism in this piece, and combined with the dynamics, does really bring out a lot of tension and release throughout this whole piece. And when you listen to this piece while reading the text, whether it be in Latin or English, you can really see how those two things, the text and the music, do connect, and how these secondary dominants and secondary leading chords do bring a lot of that raw emotion into this whole overall piece. Now, I really like how in the end we do how the tension is released with that plagal cadence, that amen cadence, the picardy there. I believe that's a good way to end, especially like a sacred piece, especially because the whole piece talks about God and crying and suffering, and then at the end, kind of like it ends a way that a prayer would end, or like a mass would end, and which would have to end in a good note, because this is sacred, this is something religious, and it only makes sense. Now, as far as something to think about is how would you think that this whole piece would sound if Mozart was able to live long enough to finish off this piece? There have been different things that I have read where different like scholars and composers and stuff kind of rejected everything that Mozart did not write, because he thought it wasn't characteristic of Mozart's writings. And not just this piece, but Lacrimosa is actually like towards the middle of the whole Requiem, and it's a long set of works that for this whole Requiem in D minor, and it would be very interesting to see what Mozart would have done. And maybe all these themes and the form type would have made a lot more sense if he had written the piece himself, rather than have someone else finish it off for him. So it's just something to think about, and it's just something that probably you never knew, that this piece wasn't just written by him, it was written by himself and someone else. And this is something that not a lot of people know, and it's all credited to Mozart. So it's just something to think about. And this has been the Lacrimosa by Mozart. Well, what we say is Mozart. And this is a great piece to listen to. It is a short piece, but I believe you can take a lot out of this piece, out of this short section of the Requiem. And if you have any questions about the homework, about this whole piece, and if you want to discuss your ideas, maybe your ideas are completely different than mine, then go ahead and give me a holler. I'll be there, and we can discuss a great piece of music that will always be here with us for the rest of our musical career.